Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum. On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, Dustin Dopirak from The Athletic is here to preview this weekend's Indiana-Purdue game. Dustin, of course, covers Indiana, Purdue, and Butler for The Athletic, so he has unique insight on both of the teams. Purdue obviously coming off that big win over Iowa. The Hoosiers struggling with 3 straight losses. So what does Dustin expect on Saturday when the Hoosiers host Purdue? What are some matchups to watch? And how important is this game for both teams? We talk about all of that and much more with Dustin. We always appreciate his insight when this game rolls around because, like I said, he knows these two teams intimately. So I think you'll enjoy that conversation, get a lot out of it. Before we get to that, I do want to make sure that you know that after the IU-Purdue game on Saturday, the Assembly Call team is hosting a live IU-Purdue postgame show at Switchyard Brewery, which is on Walnut. And we would love for you to come out. This is our, obviously none of us live in Bloomington. I live in Dallas. Ryan lives out in San Diego. Andy lives in Cincinnati. Coach is, up in Delphi. And so we all come together for one game every year. And this is the year that we'll be up there. And obviously it's a big opportunity for us to meet our Assembly Call audience. But for me, as the host of Podcast on the Brink, it's a great opportunity for me to meet people like you who listen to Podcast on the Brink. And maybe you listen to both, but perhaps you only listen to this show. And so I want to make the most out of my trips up there, and the thing that means the most to me is being able to shake the hands and thank the people who listen to these shows that we put out, because without people like you listening, there's no reason for me to do these shows. And so if you're going to be at the game, definitely let me know. Send me a tweet at Assembly Call. My direct messages are open, so let me know if you'll be there because I would love to meet you. And then if you're not doing anything after the game, we'd love for you to join us at Switchyard. Hopefully Alex will come out there. A lot of your favorite Indiana podcasters will be out there. We invited a lot of folks out there. And so we hope that you'll come. It'll just be a fun chance to talk about the game, but more importantly, talk amongst each other, hang out with friends, have a good beer, and just enjoy a few hours hanging out together in Bloomington. So if you're going to be around, let me know. And hopefully we'll see you there at Switchyard. It'll start probably about an hour after the game, maybe a little sooner. It just depends on how long it takes us to get over there after the game, because we, of course, will be at Simon Skjodt Assembly Hall for the game. So we'll get over there, we'll start things out, and it'll just be, just a fun, relaxed atmosphere. So we hope that you'll be out there. Again, Switchyard Brewing. And if you need any details as we go through, send me an email, Jerod at assemblycall.com, or send me a direct message on Twitter at assemblycall. Okay, all of that out of the way. Let's hop in now to our conversation with Dustin Dopirak previewing IU-Purdue. All right, and we are here this week on Podcast on the Brink with Dustin Dopirak from The Athletic. He covers Butler, he covers Purdue, he covers Indiana. Dustin, that's why we always want to have you come in here, ahead of the IU-Purdue game, give us some insight on these two teams. We are talking on Thursday morning, one day after Purdue absolutely obliterated Iowa at home. But an Iowa team that had been playing pretty well. I'd like for you to start out by telling us why what we saw last night from Purdue is absolutely not transferable Saturday to Assembly Hall.
I mean, I don't want to go so far as to say it's totally not transferable, but so I wasn't there last night. I went to Butler to see Kamar Baldwin hit his walk off to beat Villanova. So I haven't seen this yet. I don't know how this occurred, but I'm looking at this box score, and it's not like anything I've seen all year from this Purdue team. It is like what it's really like is it's the best version of every one of them all together on the same night. Again, which you just have not seen at all, but and to a really ridiculous level. I mean, then they had 1.5 per possession, obviously, which is nuts. 19 three-pointers, which is totally insane. Evan Boudreau, who, again, looks like he should be playing with all of us at the Y, goes off for 18 and 7. He was crazy. Jahad Proctor and Aaron Wheeler, who have been really gone through some really horrible stretches, were darn near perfect last night. I think they combined for 25 points, if I'm not mistaken. Jahad Proctor was perfect, 6 for 6 from the field. I think 3 for 3 from 3. Just everything that could possibly go right for them goes right. They were dominant on the glass. And you pointed out Luke Garza, I think, only had 1 rebound. It was just, they were perfect. They were beyond perfect. They were just beyond, so far beyond everything I've seen from them this year. And they're not a bad basketball team. They're certainly dangerous. They've beaten Michigan State at home, just really did a good job of harassing Cassius Winston that night and got some shots to fall. And they can be dangerous again when they get some shots to fall, but that was at an entirely different level. And getting it from guys who have not at all been consistent, who have shown potential at times, and even I thought Jahad Proctor and Aaron Wheeler are going to be really good players this season. And especially over the last two months, they have not been. So there is some potential in them. But again, just to get it to all come together from basically every single player last night was just, they really caught lightning in a bottle.
On the bright side, the way that Iowa played absolutely is transferable, and that's who Indiana plays after Purdue. So let's take the bright side view of that game.
And in February, yeah, it is a thing that really happens. For as good as this Iowa team has been, that always seems to be lurking. And defensively, sometimes they just play too fast and they get burned. And, we've seen that for how many years with Fran McCaffrey teams. So this was an unbelievable, top level example of that, apparently.
So let's talk a little bit more about this Purdue team, because I think everybody's known, they're a solid team, and they've picked up some good wins at home, some dominant wins at home. So, dominating a decent team wasn't that surprising because they've done that to the level that they beat Iowa was. Right. But the question about this Purdue team has been, can they win on the road? And I think a lot of people, kind of have that thought anchored by that game on January 5th when they went to Iowa and just got killed 63-37. Yeah. Or that's what I meant. Illinois. Yeah. And they just got killed 63-37. And, they followed that up by, losing in double overtime at Michigan. They lost to Maryland by 7. They lost to Rutgers by 7. Were at least competitive in those games. And then obviously had that thrilling comeback against Northwestern where they finished the game on an 11-0 run. So they have been much better at home than on the road, but they've been playing better on the road. And so while what they did at home may not be transferable, what do you expect to see from them Saturday inside of Assembly Hall?
Well, I think the reason that they are generally competitive on the road and why they don't win is they're still a really good defensive team. That's been the case from day one. That I think when you looked at this team and said, okay, look at all that Purdue is losing with Carson Edwards and Ryan Klein. Like, how are they going to beat you? Defensively was always the answer. From the beginning. I think they have a couple of really good, perimeter defenders. They got a really good sort of on the ball point guard defender in Eric Hunter. He's really grown up a lot this season. Was, he even referred to himself as a liability last year, but has really done a good job of just being a guy that can step in there and jam. And Nogel Eastern, I think, is probably top of my mind. I can't think of too many better defensive players in the league. Now obviously that's because I'm covering the team and that's all they talk about is how great he is defensively, so I watch him closely and I don't necessarily watch as many other guys that closely, but Eastern can defend anybody, 6'7", 230. He's really good against guards. He's played some of that stuff where he sort of serves as a closer, basically, where you'll hunt around on him all night and put Eastern on a guy for the last 5 minutes if he's been burning you, and he'll just swallow him up. So it's the fact that they have those two guys sort of anchoring it. Then you've got a 7'3" guy in the middle at Harms, and also Williams, who can handle wide bodies. They can be a really good defensive team because their defensive numbers are really, really good. I think they're 15th, in efficiency. I could be wrong about that, but it's close to it. So that always gives them a chance. That always gives them opportunities. They're not generally letting teams score all over them. Every once in a while they've had laid an egg on defense, but it hasn't happened very often. Usually they're going to be able to keep themselves in games that way. They don't play really high tempo, so it gives themselves a shot. And the thing is, they usually shoot really well at home and they don't shoot really well on the road. I think the Sasha Stefanovic's splits home and road in terms of how he shoots is crazy. He's just lights out at Mackey, and he is not at all on the road. And that's a big change. There's a bunch of other guys that have that it's not as true to that extent. But it just seems like Mackey is really a friendly confined situation in terms of them shooting the basketball. Mackey is a good gym to shoot in. Generally it seems to me like teams, shooters transfer when it's kind of a tight background, when the, seats are pretty close right behind the bucket. And obviously Mackey, that's the case. The way it's set up is again, fans are sort of right behind it. But Assembly Hall is kind of the same way. So it out of places that you can shoot on the road, Assembly Hall is probably one of the better places. But they all just really shoot well at Mackey, and they just seem to never really adjust on the road. And you just see some bad shooting numbers. That's really the biggest thing. Is again, defensively they can keep themselves in it. It's just at home they make a bunch of buckets, and on the road they don't. And they don't have a bunch of guys that can just create. They're just the guys are, Proctor, Hunter are just okay when it comes to getting to the rim off the dribble. Obviously, Travion Williams is a tough guy to keep away from the bucket. He's got really good touch around there, but some nights that's the only thing that they can really rely on in terms of getting buckets in the paint. They're not really getting as much from it as the guards, and that's a big reason why they struggle on the road is they're not getting outside shooting, and they're not necessarily getting guards that can really break it down and take it to the rim. So they end up really having to rely deeply on what they get out of the post, out of Harms, and mostly Williams. Obviously, the reason they were able to go to double overtime against Michigan is Travion Williams was incredible in that game, and Michigan chose to never double team, and he ended up with 36 in that game. So that's really sort of the key piece that kind of explains why does Purdue win when they do, and why do they lose? Why do they lose and how they lose. That's really why.
Dustin, I'm not sure if you know this, but there's two teams in the Big Ten that Archie Miller hasn't beaten since taking over the Indiana job. One of them's Michigan, the other one's Purdue. From a big picture perspective, this game on Saturday, I know it has major implications for the tournament this year just because Indiana needs to start winning games. But I guess how important is it for Archie Miller to be able to get a win finally over Purdue, and what I guess kind of the key matchups in your mind in this game when you look at what Indiana has to do well to beat Purdue? What are those things?
Man, those are two really, really good questions. So we'll start with Archie. I think, and that's a fascinating question. I think it's, it is, and I think it is really important for him because I think Indiana fans are just sick of losing to Purdue. I think there's obviously, on a whole bunch of levels, he really just needs to continue proving himself and continue to do things that because it's obviously the Indiana fan base is getting frustrated. It's actually has been frustrated. Who am I kidding? Is getting frustrated. Has been frustrated for a long time. Not just with Archie, but with everything, and constantly feeling like games they're supposed to win. They're just supposed to be at a higher level. They're supposed, Purdue is supposed to be little brother, so they should be beating them again and again and again and again, and yet they keep losing. And it just sort of feels like, the team that is supposed to be inferior is not. The team that they're supposed to be superior to, they haven't been. So obviously, I think just losing to Purdue ends up just again ratcheting up the sort of fever that Indiana fans have, and just a general level of annoyance. So anything you can do to take that down a notch is important. And obviously just, kind of feeling like, trying to find a way that makes it seem like he is the biggest program in the state. But again, I mean, Matt Painter is an established coach. Matt Painter is a guy who is secure, who has sort of figured out what his formula is and how to win. And Archie Miller, again, hasn't necessarily done that. He knows how he wants to win. He knows how he wants to get it done, but he doesn't necessarily have a program that is just running on rails. And even though Purdue is not playing as well as they did a year ago, basically everything is going according to plan. I think it says a lot for Matt Painter and how he views this team and sort of in the context of everything he wants to do going forward. And the fact that he's, redshirting two of his three freshmen, including Brandon Newman, who was, second in Mr. Basketball last year. Generally, that's not a guy who takes a red shirt. And obviously I think, Painter thinking long-term was saying, this probably isn't going to be my best year. I can afford to be a bubble team and just, and maybe even miss the tournament. But I believe that long-term that this group is going to be okay. He's a guy that is, feels safe in where he is and where he's going and doesn't, I don't think even necessarily feels like he has to win this game. That it's not something that is necessary for him in terms of his long-term prospects, where for Archie Miller, it is more important. It's definitely going to be one of those things that's going to be looked at as he continues to get judged, year after year in terms of, okay, is this working? Is this guy getting it together? And it's not a situation where, they're not really recruiting the same guys anymore. There's certainly some battles, but they're not playing the same game out there on the trail. Indiana's still trying to get the best players they possibly can, where Purdue is looking at it as there are specific guys that they want for specific reasons. They're more interested in making sure they've got shooters, making sure they've got skill guys, and not really being worried about their level of athleticism or length or a lot of the sort of things that you look at in terms of upside. Purdue's less interested in that. So in a lot of cases, they're fighting for different players. Again, sometimes they want the same guys, sometimes they don't. But, there's a lot of occasions where they're going after guys that, Indiana doesn't necessarily want, and vice versa. As far as matchups, I think, I'm just really interested in how the front court's going to work out. It basically, because obviously, you thinking, right out of the gate, you're thinking, okay, Joey Brunk on Travion Williams. If Purdue is playing both guys at the same time, which they could, and they could not, obviously, because Evan Boudreau started the last game, and all of a sudden Evan Boudreau looks like a dude. But if it's going to be, Harms and Williams out there, you're obviously going to have probably Trace on Harms and have to deal with a guy that's got a lot more length than he does, but doesn't necessarily have sort of the body, the physicality. But again, is a tough guy to cover, is really athletic, is going to run the floor at the same, to the same degree that Trace does. And Brunk's obviously going to have to deal with a guy that's more of a wide body, that's again, really, really skilled in there, really, really, really physical, can push guys around, but also is really smart in terms of passing out a double team. So I think, those two are really, I think, important. I mean, again, Purdue could do something different with their bigs, and it might be a situation where, maybe Trace is on Boudreau, or they flip up and Brunk goes and guards Boudreau, and you have, Jackson Davis trying to deal with again, bigger, wider body in Williams. So it's just basically going to be very interesting to see, I think, how that works out. What does Indiana have to do to keep those guys away from the rim? Again, then in the backcourt, again, intriguing. Now both of those backcourts have proven to be again inconsistent when it comes to scoring the basketball. How does Indiana go about who runs around with Sasha Stefanovic all day? Who tries to keep Hunter away from the rim? I think they'll be able to defend them, but I also think that Indiana or Purdue will be able to defend Indiana. I mean, I think if you put Eastern on Devontae Green, he can drive him completely crazy. How does that work out? Do they feel like they have to guard Justin Smith with them just because of the size? Because there's not necessarily anybody else that Purdue could put on him. How does that work out? Hunter, I think, can drive Devontae Green crazy, or Finney. So I'm very interested to see just how everybody decides on defensive matchups in this game.
Hey, I'm going to jump in here real quick and talk about Home Field Apparel. HomeFieldApparel.com is the place where you can find the most unique, the most comfortable IU apparel anywhere. And we'll get back to that. But, one of the reasons why it's so great to go to HomeFieldApparel.com, buy their stuff, is you're supporting a company founded by IU grads that still run in Indianapolis and that is incredibly supportive of IU sports. These guys went to Jacksonville for the Gator Bowl. Supportive of the football program all year long. As soon as I told Connor, who runs the show over there, that we were coming in town, he's like, great, I'm coming down. I want to see you guys. He's coming to the event at Switchyard that I told you about earlier, not to sell shirts and like set up shop and all that, but just to come and hang out and, support our show, support the team. So these are great guys. And, sometimes you do digital commerce, you're buying stuff online, e-commerce, you don't really know who you're supporting. You can rest assured that you're supporting a really good company with good values that supports Indiana athletics. And to me, that makes me enjoy the process of buying from them even more. And that process of buying from them was already awesome because of all the unique logos that they have, like the Indiana Shoes logo, like the IU Basketball Champions t-shirt, like the Bison logo hoodie, which you can get, or the Bison logo, which you can get on a hoodie or on a t-shirt. I love my Script Indiana long sleeve tee. It's my new go-to game day shirt that I wear. They have so much there. That's just scratching the surface. And in addition to all the cool logos, they put them on incredibly comfortable material. And this material is comfortable the moment that you receive the package in the mail, and it's comfortable after washing it 5, 6, 7 times, even more than that. So you're getting high-quality stuff. It's unique and really interesting. And you're supporting a great company run by great people and their fellow Hoosiers. So many reasons to go to HomeFieldApparel.com and buy their gear and use the promo code BRINK when you do it, BRINK, and you will get 20% off your entire order. Everything that you put in your shopping cart, stuff for you, stuff for friends, stuff for family, it will all be 20% off. HomeFieldApparel.com, promo code BRINK, 20% off. All right, now back to our conversation with Dustin Dopirak.
So Purdue, it seems like they've gone back and forth between the two big lineups, having Williams and Harms. Is that correct? I haven't watched them a ton this year, but they've had times where they played both. I mean, do you feel like it would be advantageous for them to play both bigs against Indiana? Because we know Indiana is going to play Jackson Davis and Brink. I mean, they've done that all year. They're not going to deviate from that. I mean, from a Purdue perspective, do they try to start out with Boudreau and maybe try to make some threes with him and draw the IU second big away from the basket, put him in some awkward situations with a pick and pop or something, or do they just start out with the two bigs? In your mind, which is better from their perspective?
I guess the thing is that like in my mind it's the two bigs because I haven't been there for Boudreau's two crazy games, between that one and Wisconsin. So like in my mind's eye, I still can't believe that what he's doing is really happening. But I mean, it makes sense from a strategic standpoint to play Boudreau, and Painter has certainly looked at it as when guys play well, they generally stay in the lineup. When they earn it, he generally doesn't pull them out until they lose it. Very rarely. I mean, I think there's got to be for a very specific matchup reason, for them to do that. I think out of just taking Boudreau out, how well Boudreau is playing out of the equation, just looking at it in a vacuum and saying, is this or is this not a good time to go two bigs? It is just again because you're dealing with two big guys, and Jackson Davis isn't going to take Harms out. And operate that much from the perimeter. Basically, Indiana is going to try to do a lot with those two guys, doing mover blocker stuff and playing on both sides of the paint. So in that case, if you're going to have them both by the bucket anyway, it makes sense to have Harms and Williams together out there. So again, in a vacuum, it makes sense to play the two bigs, and they might still just do that a decent bit. They might not start out that way, but they might still do it. But I think they are too happy with what Boudreau is doing, and also Aaron Wheeler having a big night the way he did the other night to kind of get him going. It's really important. I think if they're going to have any prospects of really going someplace, it's really important that they get something out of Aaron Wheeler. I mean, I think he gives them so much more potential. So I think they are going to want a situation where he's getting some minutes. So it probably the best way to get him some minutes is to guess interchange him with Boudreau and therefore interchange Harms and Williams together. So I would think that would be a reason, but so there's a lot of calculation I think that goes on there in Painter's part. So I think at some point you will see the bigs on the floor together, but I think they'll also try to get minutes for Wheeler and Boudreau both, just again to keep those guys going, to keep their rhythm, and to keep building on some success with those guys.
So as we look ahead to Saturday, what do you think is the most likely path to Indiana winning? I mean, obviously we can say, hey, you're at home, make a bunch of threes. That's always, in the cards. But outside of that, in terms of what Indiana does, where they have some advantages, what is the most likely path to victory? Where do you see that?
I mean, they've got to play them at least even in the paint, if not better. I mean, I think they've got to win the points in the paint situation. Win that statistic, I think, is really important, or at least play it really close, make it, more or less neutralize that again, because, on the road, if you're going to get beat by Purdue, it's going to be because they're going to be able to get the ball in the paint and, outman you basically in there. If Purdue's got any chance of beating you, it's because, Travion Williams is getting to you and beating you. So I think that's the area. If they're getting as much out of Jackson Davis and Brink on the offensive end, and as they're giving up to Williams and Harms on the defensive end, then really they've got the advantage. I mean, I guess that's the obvious way to put it, is obviously if you play them even in the paint and you hit the threes when they're not, obviously that's a pretty obvious thing for success. But obviously get to the line. That's a really just key thing. Indiana's got to get its points in the paint and at the line, and that's obviously just true for them wherever they go, is being able to win there. But I think it's especially important, I think, because Purdue can beat you that way as well. So I guess taking that advantage and being the better shooting team, taking advantage of the fact that they're the home team and Purdue is not. Again, I think both of these teams, they don't play similar styles, obviously, just because the tempo is so different. Purdue doesn't try to do nearly as much as far as playing in transition, and Purdue is certainly the better defensive team and steadier. But again, like there are two teams that I guess their advantage is with their size. Is the guys they try to get the ball to are in the paint, and neither one of them have great creators off the dribble, so they have to rely, I guess, on threes and post touches, and basically whoever's getting the most out of that wins the basketball game.
Who, outside of Devontae Green, again, where he's kind of like the wild card at home, sometimes you're going to get that great Devontae performance, and that would obviously go a long way toward Indiana winning. But outside of him, who are you looking at as maybe the key X factor for Indiana, where it's like, hey, if this guy steps up and really kind of brings his A game, this is really going to tip the scales for the Hoosiers?
I think, Hunter and Smith, I think, could be really important. I think both of those guys. I think if Hunter does enough to force them, I guess, to force Purdue to defend him, that I think could make a big difference, because again, if you can do something to take Eastern away from those guards, force him to guard Smith or to guard Hunter. I mean, I think that changes that dynamic a little bit. Again, if you can get a couple threes for Hunter, and again, just force guys out on him, or put him in a mismatch there. I mean, I think that could be really important, because it's not that Purdue doesn't have a great answer. They do. But because Eastern can certainly defend a guy like that. But again, if you can take him out of that matchup on the perimeter and not let him wreak havoc out there, it gives you more of an opportunity. I mean, obviously, if Finney can win the battle with Hunter, if he can, if Hunter ends up guarding him and Finney, plays more solid, it is the guy that's, because they have. They look different. Finney's, a solidly built right-hander, and Hunter is a kind of spindly 175-pound lefty. But they do a lot of similar things. I mean, they're very strong with the basketball. They're decent shooters. They're not high volume, but they, when they can make theirs, it makes a difference. They can both get to the rim and finish. They don't do it all the time, but they can. If Finney outplays Hunter, I think, in that matchup, I think that's really important too. Two sophomore guys, I think, that are going to be really leaders, I think, for these programs going forward. I mean, they're maybe the guys that might define this matchup over the next couple of years. If Finney, wins that battle, I think that makes a pretty significant difference. And
Dustin,
Al, I mean, Al, basically. I mean, when Durham's making shots, that makes a difference too. So if Durham is, breaking down, if he gets Stefanovic maybe or Proctor, and he wins that battle, and he's taking whoever's guarding him to the rim and hits some threes over him, that's a really, that can be really kind of an X factor as well. If you're getting more points out of Al and he's winning that matchup, whoever he's dealing with, I think that could be really key.
Dustin, as someone who covers both, two Big Ten teams and a Big East team, I'm kind of curious. I think you should have some good perspective on this. I'm just curious, kind of from, we know that there's 12 teams in the Big Ten that are ranked highly in KenPom, and I'm looking at the Big East right now, and there's 1, 2, 3, like 5 teams basically that are ranked below the 12th ranked team in the Big Ten and KenPom. When you watch these leagues up close, I mean, I'm sure you've seen a lot of these teams that are at the bottom of the Big East in person. Is there really that big of a difference between the Indianas and Purdue's as opposed to teams like Georgetown, Xavier, Providence, St. John's, DePaul? I mean, are you buying this whole, the Big Ten is far and away the best league this year, or is it just a matter of maybe the computers like this league a little bit more than other leagues? I mean, is there really this big gap between these teams that are below the 12 teams that are ranked highly in KenPom and the bottom of the Big East?
No. The short answer is no. There's a longer answer, obviously. I think the Big East is certainly, ends up shaking out more top heavy. Man, I really like Seton Hall. I really like that Seton Hall team. I really liked watching Miles Powell play. And Villanova was a blast to watch last night. I mean, Bay and Gillespie are just terrific. I didn't know how good Gillespie was until watching him last night. He is special. But DePaul's the worst team. It has the worst record in the Big East. I mean, they got a first round pick in Paul Reed. I mean, he's 6'11", 220. He can shoot it. And DePaul beat Butler up there in Chicago, and I was really impressed by what they had. So all of those teams have some really good players. Georgetown's got Max McClung, who I think is a pretty special basketball player. It was really fun to watch. Xavier's got some really good pieces. I think Xavier's going to end up sort of in that edge top half. I think they still probably end up being an NCAA tournament team. St. John's can press the heck out of you. Providence has a terrific player in Alpha Diallo, and they don't have a great record, but they're tough, and they just beat Butler at home. So the Big East is still really dangerous, top to bottom. I mean, again, DePaul is not that bad. DePaul has a bad record, and they're not that bad. So there are definitely some similarities in terms of the depth of the Big East and the Big Ten. But I do think there's still a different – obviously, Big Ten just has more teams, and I think there are – Big Ten just has 12 really good ones. And I don't know that the Big Ten's team is playing as well as the Big East best team. Obviously Michigan State beat Seton Hall, but that was a pretty even basketball game, and Seton Hall might be playing even better. If you look at the top four of the Big East and top four in the Big Ten, I think it's pretty even. Big Ten just has more teams, and I just think there's still a difference between, if Michigan right now at 4-7 is the number 12 Big Ten team, it's still I think have an edge of some of those bottom teams in the Big East. Ultimately there's more depth. Ultimately it's just more even. And I think there's just more overall talent in the Big Ten, but the Big East is really good. And again, there's not a bad team in the Big East. There's not a team in the Big East that can't beat you. And I saw, Minnesota came into Hinkle and Butler just boat raced them. So I still think like it's close. You shouldn't sleep on the Big East, and the gap isn't that wide. But I still do think it is something special, the level of depth that the Big Ten has right now.
Yeah, the reason I asked that is because I feel like right now everyone is operating under the assumption, based on all the bracketology and all of the projections that are out there, that the Big Ten is going to get 10, 11, maybe even 12 teams in the tournament. And I'm just curious if you think that kind of the narrative that we've had to this point in the season, do you think that's actually going to stand up when Selection Sunday comes? Because, obviously Saturday's matchup has some implications from a tournament perspective. I mean, Purdue's 13-10. Indiana's lost, I think, 3 in a row now. They need to start getting some wins. I mean, do you actually see a path for the Big Ten to kind of live up to some of these projections that they've had, or do you see maybe a situation where maybe some of these other leagues are being underrated from based on the projections right now? I
think the Big East is really good. I think partially, I think one other reason why there's a good chance I think that this holds up and that the Big Ten does get 10 or 11 is other leagues that have been good are not. I think the Big East is probably the second best league. The fact that the ACC is in the shape it was where it is, I think is a big reason, the big counter reason why we're having the discussion we're having about the Big Ten, because obviously North Carolina is not what it usually is. Virginia obviously has taken a step back. I think they still might be a tournament team. But you really only have the top 3 teams in the ACC, Duke, Louisville, who am I forgetting? Who am I blanking on? That's
Florida State. Florida
State, yes, of course.
I think Virginia is also a team that has a chance at this point.
Yeah, no, I think they get it, but maybe the ACC gets. If everything comes together, maybe they get 5. Maybe they get 5. That's 5 is going to be fringy, and you're used to seeing the ACC in the situations and now get 8, 9. Right. Or basically even before the ACC became what it is now, and the Big East was what it was beforehand. You would see between those two leagues, 12, 13, 14 get in. But between those two leagues, in terms of what they were before, they kind of meshed together, and the Catholic 7 broke off and became, what the Big East is now. So that's the thing, is that the total numbers of bids that are getting taken by those ACC teams is not as much, as many as it usually is. So it's someone's got to take them. So it makes sense that the Big Ten being as even as it is, and having that many teams that are, top 50, top 60, NAT, Ken Pom, all those things. The SEC is just okay. The Pac-12, is the Pac-12. I mean, I think they're better than they were a year ago, but they're still kind of a mess. No one else is stepping up to take those, bids other than the Big East. So it makes sense that if someone's going to get him, it should be the Big Ten.
Dustin, Indiana's 15-7, 5-6 in the conference. The Hoosiers have 5 home games left and 4 road games left. When you watch this team, when you think about this team right now, just viscerally, like not looking at KenPom projections, not looking at numbers, what's your expectation for the rest of the season? Like, how do you think that this team, and I know it's kind of an impossible question. I know we're all putting our hands up right now because it's very hard, but like just kind of viscerally in your gut, where do you lean? Like, do you think that this team will have just kind of a decent finish? You think it'll be stronger than maybe it looks right now? Or do you think that we could be in for, kind of a rough go of it here down the stretch?
Where do I start with that? There's such a chaos team.
I apologize for the question.
No, it's a great question because it allows you to really kind of put the, us all putting our hands in the air is the answer. That's the answer.
Yeah, it kind of is.
Because, I mean, I've been ready to bury them a couple times. I mean, when they just barely beat Northwestern, I mean, the word I used, I was sitting with Taylor Lehman in the IU press room at the end of it when everybody else left. I'm like, Mike Taylor, does it feel like, it feels to me like this team's on the edge of a cliff? Like this is where the descent begins, because I think they had Ohio State that weekend, and this is before Ohio State had just, they were struggling at that point, but they hadn't fallen off the face of the earth yet. And not that they fall off the face of the earth, but I mean, they went through a stretch where you're like, oh my God, is Ohio State going to win again? And that was the middle of that. But it just seemed like, okay, well, oh man, this is every bad sign because, they got the one team that you should be able to beat. Like Nebraska, as bad as their record is dangerous as all get out still. Northwestern isn't. I mean, like every once in a while, Boo Booey being back, I mean, they're a little bit more dangerous than they were, but they didn't, I don't think they even had him in that game.
They did not.
And, okay. Wow. I mean, if you can't roll over this Northwestern team with no Boo Booey, like what are you doing? Who are you going to beat? If you can't do that at home, who in God's name are you going to beat on the road? And even at home, who you're beating? So that's the point where you're thinking, man, this might just go really, really south. And again, they go out and win that game. You've got the Michigan State game. You've got these wins where you're like, wow, man, they've got it figured out. They know what they're doing. Shoot, they're going to be all right. And then they go out and they go on the road and they can't beat anybody. So it feels like you come back home and you get it straightened out. It just seems to be that's what they are because they've got enough. They've got talent. They've got athleticism. They got some size. It's always going to give them a chance. And this team doesn't. It's not great mentally, but it's not terrible mentally. It's not as bad. I think it's tough to put. It is just sort of a visceral thing because no one is saying this necessarily, but this team likes each other more than last year's team. I don't think, again, I don't think the, ridiculous rumors were true or anything like that. But, obviously it just seemed to be a team that it was like, okay, get the ball to Romeo and Juwan and get out of the way. Except for Devontae, who was like, give me the ball. Don't, and that I think, even whether they liked each other, they didn't like each other, that obviously just caused some tension as he certainly wanted to be a part of it. And that didn't seem to be the game plan. Whereas this team, even when Devontae is, hijacking threes or whatever, it doesn't seem to bother anybody else. Personally, they don't seem to be annoyed by that fact. Even if it doesn't really help the basketball team, they don't seem to get mad at each other over it. But chemistry seems to be better in that regard, even though they don't necessarily seem to have a leader out there who can just, put his foot down and say, this is not happening. We're not losing this basketball game. So what that means is they're it doesn't go haywire sideways the same way. And they can respond to a bad basketball game better. They can lose one or two and not feel like it's the end of the world. But in the same way, they're just not consistent. And again, they don't necessarily get on the road and fall behind. And again, decide this just isn't happening today. They kind of let it go at a certain point, almost like, oh, okay, this is just not happening today. We'll come back and get them tomorrow, I guess. So again, that just makes for a very weird team to sort of predict, how they're going to react and whatever's going to happen. I guess I would just say that because I've been ready to bury them so many times and they haven't died, I presume they're not going to die. They are going to keep doing this thing where they have a couple bad performances, a couple really good ones. And right when you think they're going to be terrible, they play good. And then right when you think that they're buried and they're about to free fall, they get it together. I guess that's how I think that's how it's been so far. And I guess that's how I think it's going to continue to be. And, maybe even if they have a bad outing against Purdue, then you're like, then they'll recover. They'll get, I guess, Iowa at home is next after that, and they'll find a way to recover and win that game. Again, I think that's going to be the situation with this team is just when you're ready to bury them, they'll wake up, and just as when you're ready to crown them, they'll fall off. They'll fall off the throne. That's just that seems to be who they are, and I think that just ends up being enough with what they've done so far to get in the tournament.
But boy, if they do fall short against Purdue on Saturday, they absolutely have to come back and get it together against Iowa, because they play 4 of the next 5 on the road. So, I mean, these two games are really big. Let me end the conversation with this question. Again, this is going to be another really difficult question, so I apologize. But if Archie Miller came to you and is like, Dustin, you've seen this team play. You've seen us play for a couple of years. You have the perspective of seeing what Purdue do, seeing what Butler do. If you could make one adjustment to what I'm doing strategically, what would it be? Obviously, Archie's never going to come to you and ask this, but what would if you could say like make a change and be certain that he would actually go out there and try it from a strategic perspective on either side of the ball, what would you want to see tried?
Man. I think, it's like my first thought, because I don't really have one from an X's and O's perspective, because frankly I'm just not that good at that. Yeah. To be honest, I've never coached. I don't necessarily have a thing of try this. I think, I think with this team, I think he's done a good job mostly of saying this is our advantage. Let's take advantage of them, and they haven't. I think last year's team was worse at. Everybody realized they couldn't shoot and the paint got packed and that was over. I think obviously that same thing has happened again in terms of teams knowing that, all right, you can let them shoot. And I think they've done a better job of dealing with that. I think I thought it was very interesting that Mark Turgeon, was it Mark Turgeon that said it? I think that's who it was. He said, we couldn't zone them. We couldn't man them. He said and he just said it like it seemed like he was trying to stop himself, but he said, for a team that can't shoot, he runs really good zone offense. And I think that was just such a really telling moment, because he said, he didn't say isn't the best shooting team. He didn't try to sugarcoat it all. He just said, can't shoot. They're really good at zone offense. So I think that sort of tells you something. So I don't know if strategically I have a great answer, but what my answer would be in terms of seeing Purdue and seeing Butler, the thing that I think he hasn't done, that I haven't seen really done in Indiana, that Purdue has absolutely done, is be willing to go get a guy who can just shoot and deal with the fact that he's not a great athlete. Be able to get 1 or 2 guys to do that and say, I am recruiting shooters, period. Whatever that means in terms of what I have to deal with otherwise, I'll live with. That's what Bad Painter did with Sasha Stefanovic, with Ryan Klein, to a certain extent with Dakota Mathias, and basically has been able to trust himself that he would be able to make them serviceable defenders. And in every way, that's been the case. Klein was a serviceable defender. Stefanovic's been a serviceable defender. They're not really good. You don't put him on your best guy, but he can run around with the guys he needs to run around to. They're opportunistic. They do the right things in terms of being there positionally. And they end up getting a bunch of steals just by being where they're supposed to be at. And it ends up working out okay. And you can space the floor. And, because I think in a lot of cases, I know Tom Crean certainly did this, was concerned about getting guys who could just shoot and couldn't defend, and at least as high schoolers couldn't defend. They didn't necessarily trust them to make them good defensive players once they get there. That's one thing I would say. And I don't know that Anthony Leal fits that. I think he's a better defender, better athlete. But I think that's the thing. And be willing to go out of the state to get a guy like that. Be willing to do that and say, okay, it's that important to get shooters. It's that important to have guys on the floor that can stretch the floor and that you can rely to hit shots on, and you need them. Be willing to go get a guy who maybe doesn't do anything else, just have shooting. Yeah, again, it's risky. It is a thing that I think a lot of coaches nowadays just feel weird about the idea of having a guy that they don't trust on defense right out of the gate. But sometimes it's worth it. Sometimes you just need a guy that you can get in there and hit threes. It's too important, especially with the line moving back. It's like, okay, the way it works now, you need somebody who's going to hit shots and somebody that you can trust and somebody who's a real deal 3-point shooter. It's got to be part of your game. Again, there's just too many occasions teams been able to adjust and pack the paint on them and take away a lot of what they want to do. Again, I think they're better at dealing with that fact this year than they were last year. But just be willing to go get a guy who can shoot and deal. That would be my one piece of advice. It's one thing that I've seen that Purdue, I think, has been really very successful with. Butler has to an extent with Shawn Mcdermott. Now Shawn Mcdermott has learned to do a bunch of those other things, but I guess it's really a similar situation. McDermott was a guy who couldn't defend anybody when he got to Butler. And now he can do everything. I mean, he had 8 rebounds last night. Spent some time on Sadiq Bey. Didn't do a great job there, but it can at least resist. Learned, got himself stronger, made himself a complete player. Be willing to take a chance on some of those guys that, when you're looking at him right now, what can you do? He can shoot, and if he's a kid who works hard, who's dedicated, who's going to be in there, trust that, give him a couple years, you can do that. And if you pile those guys on top of each other, then they're not a liability. Then, you don't have to play them that much when they're freshmen. They're not a liability. They might be a liability when you get them. They won't be a liability later. You're not as exposed at the beginning if you have somebody else who you've done the same thing with, and you've kind of created a chain of players like that. You can't build a whole team that way, but you can get one guy and you can take that risk, and it'll help you in the long term.
It's a really interesting point. It may be risky to take a guy like that, but boy, if the last couple of years have taught us anything, it's that it's risky to enter a season without shooting that you can't rely on. So either way, which risk would you rather have? I'd rather have some guys that can knock down some threes. I think it's been proven that that's pretty important. Dustin, we appreciate you coming on with us. Any kind of final gut feelings about how the game Saturday goes? I know you probably don't want to give a prediction, and it probably would be foolish to give one because it'll probably be a 1-possession game down to the final buzzer. But do you have just a gut feeling about how the game kind of flows?
The thing is like what I would have said after last night. Like last night is just throwing my entire world off. So I got nothing. I mean, I really, it's again, apparently these are just going to be 2 chaos teams, and I can't even begin to try to guess what's going to happen. I would presume that anything I would guess would be the opposite then of what goes on. I mean, if I were to take last night out of the picture, if I throw away Purdue's game last night totally and said, that's just not who they are. That's not who they're going to be. Don't read into, don't make this think that, well, this guy's got to figure it out. That guy's got to figure it out. I would think that what would happen is Purdue would find a way to slow it down, muck it up. And again, it would be a couple possession game, but I think Indiana would be able to pull it out just because I think there's a little bit more a total amount of size, total athleticism. Even though Purdue has the two big centers, you throw Smith in there, and I think they've got more ability to get points in the paint and get fouled and get buckets that way. There's just a little bit more overall length and athleticism might be enough for Indiana to win at home. They're more confident at home. Again, Purdue struggles to shoot on the road. My thought would be Indiana wins a low possession game by a couple of buckets. After Wednesday night, I don't know, maybe Purdue has found itself. And again, they're not going to score 104 points against anybody other than Iowa because Iowa's Iowa. But, it makes me reconsider what Purdue's capable of. I mean, I guess I'll still go with Indiana. But again, these teams are apparently just 2 chaos basketball teams. And I don't even want to guess what happens when they get on the floor together because black hole opens up. I don't know.
Purdue comes in and does anything like that on Saturday, just cancel the rest of the season.
Oh, yeah. I mean, 19 3-pointers is probably going to beat everybody.
Yeah.
I just hope we get something better to watch than last year's 48-46 game is all I can say.
Yeah, that game was intense, though. I mean, it was ugly basketball, but it was
bad. It was bad basketball. I'm sorry,
it was bad basketball. It was bad offensive basketball. There was some good defense.
Multiple NBA players on the court, and the teams didn't even combine to score 100. So that's, by definition, not great basketball. So.
No. Well, we'll see. Huge game, huge opportunity for Indiana to get a quality win and kind of get things back on track. So hopefully they can do that, build a little momentum heading into Iowa because they've got to get – they really probably need to get both these home games. They absolutely have to get at least one. So let's go get the first one on Saturday. Yeah. Dustin, thank you. Look forward to seeing you this weekend. And
Absolutely. Look forward to having you guys out there.
Absolutely. And we will talk to you soon. I always appreciate your insight.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dustin.
All right, everybody. We will hopefully see some of you on Saturday, and we will talk to you guys next week on a new edition of Podcast on the Brink. Take care. Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. Remember to join me and my co-hosts for more IU basketball talk at assemblycall.com and visit Alex over at insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana basketball. If you want to support Podcast on the Brink, here is the single best way to do it. Tell anyone you know who loves IU hoops about us and suggest that they subscribe. Podcast on the Brink can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Tell your social media followers, email your friends, text your family members. For weekly discussion about IU basketball, they need to be subscribed to Podcast on the Brink. We'll talk to you next time. Go Hoosiers.